this humanity. You don't need to be at the bottom, you don't need to be at the top, but in the middle there are lives being lived, there are lives being fully lived, even if they don't look that way from outside, but they are... Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Today, a wonderful American writer, Denis Johnson, somebody who has produced a relatively small body of work when it comes to fiction, but who also represents, and perhaps mostly represents, a different type of voice, even though it was coming from a long tradition of American writers, but it is not one of those great American novels that seemingly America has been waiting for many, many decades. Denis Johnson really represents a different type of America, one that is of course very often written about, but that probably doesn't have the same type of attention, or doesn't receive the same type of attention in the wider cultural context, of course. Now we will be using as a point of reference, as a main point of reference, his wonderful novel Train Dreams from, let me check, 2011. And Train Dreams, like most of his production really, is a short novel, perhaps under 200 pages probably, and we'll be of course referring to the others as well. Now you probably have heard of Denis Johnson or Train Dreams, first of all because Train Dreams was turned into a movie or series recently, in 2025 maybe. I haven't seen it, so I don't know what was made of it. And the other reason is that Denis Johnson was a major voice, of course, in American fiction. He died about 10 years ago, in 2017. And he had a sort of long career in academia as a professor of writing, etc. But very much also as a sort of outsider, as it were, because his novels and his production in general, I think, his short stories, for example, to say nothing of his poetry, are not really the types of books that necessarily attract a very wide audience. They can be sometimes quite harsh to read, or difficult to read because they're harsh and they're very realistic in many ways. And of course, what comes through very strongly in many of them is that Denis Johnson doesn't really try to sell you any dream, and the aspirations of the characters are always relatively, in many ways, small. Now, he wrote 10 novels, 2 short story collections, which are really, I think, exceptional, very small, again, very thin books, but packing an incredible punch each time. And he came to prominence perhaps with his first novel, Angel, from 1983. And Angel is one of those novels that is very rewarding ultimately, but it is sometimes so bleak, and the lives of the characters are so destroyed and aimless and full of dashed hopes, that it is a pretty dark book to read. Again, as usual, and as we'll say in a second, there are moments of absolute beauty as well. Tree of Smoke is the outlier. Perhaps it's a big book, also centered around a historical event, the JFK story. Another very slim book, a roman noir, that is a detective novel in the tradition of Chandler or those people, Chase. Train Dreams from 2011, Nobody Move from 2009, that is the detective, wonderful little book. His typical characters, but in a setting full of stereotypes about 1940s, 50s type of hard-boiled detectives, and typical Johnson in a new clothes, as it were. And The Laughing Monsters, the last one is 2014, and the two short story collection, Jesus' Son is one, wonderful, and The Largesse of the Sea Maiden is another one. Now, why is Denis Johnson worthy of our attention beyond having produced some exceptional books, which would be reason enough, obviously? First of all, as I said, even though he is sort of left field in many ways, there is a long tradition to examine sort of the lives of the people in America, of course. Now you just have to think about Faulkner, obviously, and your typical sort of life that escapes attention from the powerful, the rich, or even the middle classes. So that is not new in itself, of course, and there have been over the decades many such writings. At the same time, of course, America, perhaps over the last few decades, has been dominated perhaps by a more intellectual type of literature. I know that's very debatable, of course. And intellectual, I mean, in a sense of also perhaps more politically, but engaged, but politically at a more sort of conceptual level, perhaps. And you just have to think, of course, of the towering figures. I don't know if Dave Eggers, Jonathan Franzen, people like that, of course, who have been very much done at Tart, so the big figures of American fiction. And those are in tone and in style and in themes also very different from Faulkner, for example. They may try to reach similar aims, but the books are very, very different. So in that sense, Denis Johnson, while of course he comes from a long tradition and also a tradition of realistic fiction, really going back to the end of the 19th century, at least in Europe, he's also an outlier. He was also an outlier in that sense that he was really interested in the small lives. Now, what is interesting, of course, is exceptionally interesting with him, is that it's not simply being interested in working class lives or, labor classes types of lives. It is that there is no attempt at extracting any sort of tears from the reader. This is not the point. The point is not to say, look, I'm going to show you the worst here in terms of living conditions or whatever, being in the world. And really what I want you to do is, feel heartbroken about those people. And it might have a political aim so that we go out and do something. It might have a purely journalistic aim. But in fact, Denis Johnson has none of those in many ways. He is interested in the humanity, in a general sense, in a broad sense perhaps, but also I think very often in the what is humanity when so much has been taken away from people. It is certainly the case in Angel, again, his first novel, where time and again those characters have aspirations, but their aspirations are always proportional, of course, to what they can dream about. And one question is, what can you dream about when the bare necessities are your first hope, your first dream is that. So what is it exactly that you can dream about when everything's been taken away, of course? Now, all those novels and those short stories, and I don't know his poetry. I know he wrote a lot of poems, but I've never read his poetry, so I cannot comment on that, of course. But I have read all the rest. And really there is here a very consistent stylistic. So that's probably a little bit less true in Tree of Smoke. But in short stories and the other novels, there is certainly a stylistic unity here, a very strong stylistic unity and a very strong voice as well. So again, here we can think back to some American writers that have also worked in that sort of terse, at times, clipped voice. But I think Denis Johnson goes beyond that. He goes beyond the sort of very manly Hemingwayan style, for example, but he's much more into the dry, not very full of adjectives and adverbs that, enliven everything and make everything prettier or heavier. If you want to think about the total opposite stylistically, perhaps you can think about Martin Amis, a magician with language, of course, but in a completely different atmosphere. And what Denis Johnson creates is typically relatively shortish sentences and sort of dryness to the vocabulary and to the style itself, but at times immensely lyrical, and managing to find some incredible beauty, really, in the assembly of simple words and the cadences, but also the images sometimes he comes up with, or the simple lines of thought of a character who, in the middle of the most miserable situation possible, for example, suddenly comes out with one thought that is just lyrical and beautiful in itself. And that, I think, is this continuous line between a language anchored in reality, anchored in the everyday of nobodies, and at the same time still in touch with something bigger and something more magical than themselves. Now, another aspect that is certainly very prominent, not only in Trio of Smoke, but in Train Dreams, this wonderful novel, is American history. And American history, this time not in a lyrical sense or in the New Frontier sense, not in the JFK type of period and a conquest. This is more the American history in its, again, everyday little things, and many of those things are not very nice, of course, as any country that developed built on other people's suffering, typically. And Train Dreams, for example, has some just very simple passages about, for example, Chinese immigrants and the way they're treated. But again, here, Denis Johnson is exceptional in that he doesn't make a meal out of it. He doesn't spend like 2 pages recounting the misery that those Chinese immigrants, for example, went through constructing the railroads and everything. But just a simple line or a dialogue or a very short scene introduces that subject and highlights not only the sort of evil behind, obviously, segregation, racism and the like, but also the casualness of it. And the casualness of racism in that sense, in this scene, for example, in the opening scene of Train Dreams, expresses so much and expresses a lot more than would a whole book written about the whole treatment of the Chinese migrants, of course. And there is here, therefore, a casualness also of violence, a casualness of a certain disregard for life. And in Train Dreams, again, it is not so much apparent in the narrator, but very much in the world that he inhabits. And basically, it's just a guy going from job to job, ending up constructing himself, or helping, of course, build the railways crossing America, but also having had a job as a tree feller, he's done a bit of everything. And central to the book is the fact that a natural catastrophe took his wife and child from him. And nothing much happens, but in a way, everything that happens is related to not a period exactly, but a period of history. And what you see in Train Dreams, in, again, fewer than 200 pages, is the development of America, first half of the century, really, from a wild, empty place that our character inhabits to a steadily more colonized, steadily more technological place. And this transformation of America is basically not discussed. It is not weighty, it is not heavily introduced in a text at all. It's just touches in the evolving environment of the character that reminds us that yes, here comes the first car he goes into, here comes the first air balloon he goes into, here come the first trains crossing the whole country, and this is the beginning of now. And all this is wonderfully handled in that way as well. Now, obviously, Denis Johnson, understand, is what has been labeled very often a voice for voiceless. I made a video about a wonderful Scottish writer, James Kelman, another voice for the voiceless. And here again, Denis Johnson's characters very typically are the voiceless. Now, it's not always true, because in one of them, I can't remember which one now, of course, but he has a very sort of autobiographical really type of approach, I think. Or certainly the main character is somebody like him, sort of in and out of academia, in and out of literary circles. And so this is not a nobody in the sense of somebody being lost, etc. But at the same time, he has the same loss, the same void as all the other characters really typically have. And that is again this feeling perhaps that it's all this is it's unfair, or there should be something more, or why, and there is no answer. Millions of pages have been written about why it is like this, but it is reminding us that everyone all the time, whatever the condition, will also ask those questions. Is that all? Why me? All those things. And of course, typically those voiceless people are those who are, in many of his novels or short stories, people with nothing, like materially speaking, or they have really poor, the worst of the jobs with the worst of the pays. And so they are typically in touch with, everything that is unseen, that people know exists and has always existed. And the question here is there also light? Is there humanity there as well? And that is, I think, what Denis Johnson is very interested in trying to show, that yes, of course, there is humanity here. And humanity is damaged in that sense, in those circles. But there is something profoundly human as well that is worth talking about and exploring. So, voiceless, yes. Simple, no. Those characters are not simple, and that is of course the same idea. They cannot be simple, because that would be really betraying their humanity. If they are as humans, if everybody has that spark of humanity as well, then of course we're all infinitely complex. And it might be that somebody thinks about the investments they've made and how many millions they can get from it, and get worried about it. And you get worried about your job, you get worried about your child, you get worried about your car, and then the fewer things you have, the fewer possessions, the less power you have. Doesn't mean that you don't worry about things. It doesn't mean you don't think about things, or don't wish that there would be more. Of course not. And that is again that trace of humanity. That means that those characters, while their lives may seem simple in some ways, and they are not that simple really, their inner lives are just as complex, of course, as anybody else in the world. So in that sense, it is not the great American novel of American identity, and who are we and what will we become, as it were. It is a work, a literary work that addresses again a layer of population that is the heart of America probably, but also of numerous other countries around the world. All countries around the world have those voiceless people, and all of them have been trying to cry out and say to everyone, and we have a humanity as well. There is something worth looking at here. If only to remind ourselves that yes, there is a lot of suffering as well, and that suffering is not equal. Now, some work in Jesus' Son, for example, a wonderful collection, Some works by Denis Johnson are not simply concerned with those extreme voicelessness as well. And so what he explores really in his other books is always the same idea, I think, of this humanity. You don't need to be at the bottom, you don't need to be at the top, but in the middle there are lives being lived, there are lives being fully lived, even if they don't look that way from outside, but there are also plenty of lives that fail to be fully lived. And which life am I failing to live, as the other one said? It is Margaret Atwood, I think. I'm now quoting out of my head, but I think it's Margaret Atwood, this. A wonderful short story, I think. And which life am I failing to live? And is that the life that I wanted for myself? And is that the life that was imposed on me? And everybody has those things. And everybody has this sort of emptiness as well, this sort of regret, this sort of something. You can't put your finger on it, but you know it's there somewhere. And that is one of the gems that pop up all the time in Denis Johnson's work. So, really in conclusion, I can only encourage you to read this wonderful, wonderful American writer. Again, the great majority of his work consists of small volumes. It's just a world that is unique as well as being universal in that sense. And his style, his tone, his voice, all this is really wonderfully unique and extremely rewarding as a reading experience. So, good reading, and until next time, bye-bye. Thank you.